At 68, my own son tried to destroy me. He didn't expect this. When my son texted me that I was no longer his responsibility, I was already 68 years old. I had raised him, sacrificed everything for him, and in one sentence, he erased me. I sat at my kitchen table that morning, the one Roberto and I bought together 43 years ago, and I read the words that shattered something inside me that I thought was already broken. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and my own family. I read it 3 times, 4 times. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I'm not sure how long I sat there, staring at those words on the screen, my café con leche going cold beside me. The morning light was coming through the same windows where I had hung the curtains I sewed by hand, where I had watched my son grow from a boy who needed me into a man who, it seemed, had spent years waiting for me to become invisible. Name is Elena Maria Ruiz de Morales, and I am 68 years old. I have been a wife for 45 years, first to a man I loved more than I loved myself, and then, for the last 6 years, a widow. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. I am a woman who has spent the majority of her life making sure everyone around me was comfortable, fed, loved, and secure. And I had just been told by my only son that I was a burden he was not willing to carry. But this is not a story about that moment. This is a story about what happened after. I need to tell you who I was before that message because it matters. It matters because you need to understand how easily a woman can disappear into her own family, how invisibly, how completely. My husband Roberto died on a Tuesday in March. Heart attack, sudden, final. One moment he was drinking his morning coffee and the next moment he was gone, and I was left standing in the kitchen, covered in his coffee, screaming his name in a way that I have never screamed anything before or since. The sound came from somewhere so deep inside me that I barely recognized it as my own voice. The doctors said his heart had been weakening for years. They said there were signs. I remembered the signs. I had noticed them and said nothing because it was what we did in our marriage. I noticed things and let them pass. I adapted. I adjusted. I kept the house running smoothly while Roberto got to be the one with dreams and plans and autonomy. That is not a criticism of my husband. Roberto was a good man. He was kind. He was not cruel or controlling. He was simply, by the standards of his generation and culture, a man, and I was a wife. That was the shape of our arrangement, and I had filled that shape so completely that I had no idea who I was outside of it. After he died, I learned things. I learned that his will left everything to our son, Daniel. Everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the investments we had accumulated over decades. Everything was in Roberto's name, and when he died, it all went to Daniel. I was left with my widow's pension, a modest amount, enough to live but not enough to thrive. For months, I was in shock. Not about the money, though that was certainly part of it. I was in shock because I realized, standing in my own kitchen that I had maintained for 4 decades, that I owned nothing. Not really, not legally. I existed in a house that was now my son's house. I spent his money on groceries and utilities. I was there on borrowed ground. Daniel was kind about it in the beginning. He told me I could stay in the house as long as I wanted. He helped me with things. He came by with his wife, Lucia, who was beautiful and sharp in a way that made me feel soft and old. They brought their 2 children, Carlos, who was 6, and little Mia, who was 4. I loved those children so much that it physically hurt to look at them sometimes. I loved them the way you love things you have already started to lose. And I helped. Oh, how I helped. I watched the children when Lucia wanted to go shopping or have lunch with her friends. I cooked Sunday dinners. I mended clothes. I gave money when Daniel said they needed it, for a new roof, for a car repair, for emergencies that seemed to happen with increasing frequency. I gave without counting because that is what mothers do. That is what I had learned to do. It was not enough. Or perhaps it was too much. I am still not entirely sure which. The first time I felt the shift was about 6 months before that message. Daniel called and his voice had a tension in it that I had not heard before. They needed money urgently, he said, $15,000. His mother-in-law had cancer, and the insurance would not cover certain treatments. Lucia was beside herself with worry. They were desperate. Could I help? I did not hesitate. I transferred the money the next day. I did not have $15,000 just sitting in an account. I was living on a modest pension, but I had investments that Roberto had left me, small things that were actually in my name. I liquidated them. I told myself it was what mothers do. We sacrifice. We give. We show our children that they matter more than we do. But something small and ugly started growing in my chest after that. It was a feeling I had never allowed myself to have before. Doubt. The next time I saw Lucia, I asked her how her mother was doing. How was the treatment going? Was she responding well? She looked at me with confusion. Treatment for what? She asked. My stomach went cold. I felt it actually go cold, like ice water poured directly into my belly. For her cancer, I said carefully. The treatment that Daniel said. Cancer? Lucia laughed. It was not a warm laugh. Elena, my mother doesn't have cancer. She's fine. She's in Cancun right now, actually. Why would Daniel tell you that? I left that conversation without answers. I sat in my car for an hour, gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide what I had actually heard and what I had misunderstood. Maybe I had gotten it wrong. Maybe I had confused what Daniel said. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. But there was not a misunderstanding. I knew there was not a misunderstanding. And that knowing started to change me in ways I did not fully understand yet. I started paying attention. I started watching. I noticed how Daniel's eyes would go to things in my house, the paintings, the furniture, the kitchen appliances, and how he would comment on their value. I noticed how Lucia would shift the conversation toward my plans for the future. "You're getting older, Elena," she would say, smiling that sharp smile. "Don't you think you should think about a nursing home? Or maybe a retirement community? Wouldn't that be easier for you?" I was 68 years old. I ran 3 kilometers every morning. I managed my own house, my own finances, my own life. I had asked her what, exactly, I needed help with. "Just planning ahead," she had said, patting my hand. "We care about you." But something in the way she said it felt like a threat. Then came the message. I remember where I was when I read it. I remember the exact position of my body, sitting at the kitchen table, the cafe growing cold, the morning light hitting the wall in that specific way it does in late winter in Guadalajara. I remember feeling as though I had been slapped so hard that my brain could not process it for several seconds. No context, no argument that had preceded it, just those words, sent without any warning or explanation. "Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and my own family." I must have sat there for an hour. I read the message over and over, trying to find some version of it that made sense. Was this a mistake? Had Daniel sent this to me by accident? Had someone else sent it from his phone? I went through 1,000 versions of the explanation, and none of them stuck. 3 days earlier, we had all had dinner together. We had laughed. We had eaten the paella that I had made. Daniel had complimented my cooking. Lucia had been pleasant, if cool, and now this. What had changed between that dinner and this message? Or had this resentment been simmering beneath the surface all along, hidden behind smiles and visits and promises of love? My hands shook as I held the phone. I wanted to call him. I wanted to demand an explanation. I wanted to beg him to tell me what I had done wrong, how I could fix it, how I could be the kind of mother that he actually wanted. That is what the old Elena would have done. That is what every instinct in my body was telling me to do. But something else was happening too. Something quiet and small was beginning to grow underneath the shock and the hurt. It was anger, real, clean, clarifying anger. The kind of anger that, once you let yourself feel it, changes everything. I set down the phone. I put my hands on the table. I took a breath. And then I did something I had never done before. I answered with only 2 words. "It's fine." I sent it and set the phone on the table without waiting for a response. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking. But something inside me had shifted. The Elena who would have frantically called her son, who would have begged for forgiveness for crimes she had not committed, who would have offered more money and more help and more of herself, that Elena was no longer the one in the driver's seat. That same afternoon, I called my lawyer. His name was Tomas Herrera, and I had worked with him when Roberto died. He had helped me understand the will, had explained to me in simple terms that everything was going to my son, and had seemed sympathetic to my situation in a way that suggested he had seen this before. Women in their 60s, suddenly widowed, suddenly dependent, suddenly invisible. When I called, he fit me in the next day. "Elena," he said, settling into his chair across from me. "What's happened?" I told him. I told him about the money for the cancer treatment that did not exist. I told him about the increasing comments about my age and my future, and how much easier things would be if I were somewhere else. I told him about the message. I told him about the $15,000 and the other money I had given over the years, money that had probably never gone where they said it would. And then I told him what I wanted to do. "I want to revise my will," I said. "I want to change everything. I have some investments, some things that are actually in my name. I want to redirect them. I want to make sure that if something happens to me, my money goes to people and causes that actually deserve it." Tomas leaned back in his chair. He did not look surprised. That was the moment I realized that he had been waiting for this conversation. He had probably had it 100 times before. "Elena," he said carefully, "this is a significant step. Are you sure? This is your son we're talking about." "Yes," I said, "I am sure." And I was. Not because I was cruel, not because I wanted to punish him. I was sure because for the first time in my entire adult life, I was putting myself first. I was saying out loud to another person that I deserved to have agency over my own life and my own legacy, and it felt like breathing air after holding my breath for 40 years. "Let me think about what I want to do," I told Tomas. "I need a few days." I spent those days in a kind of productive trance. I went through my finances with a clarity I had never possessed before. I looked at the investments, small though they were. I researched causes. I reached out to charities. I read about scholarship programs. And I made my decisions with the deliberation of a woman who was, for the very first time, completely and totally in control of her own life. The university where I had studied, back when I was young, and still believed I might be something other than a wife. They had a scholarship fund for women over 40 returning to education. I wanted to fund scholarships for 5 women a year. I found a children's hospital and decided to donate money for their palliative care unit. I researched animal rescues and found one that specialized in elderly dogs who had been abandoned. I put aside a small inheritance for my granddaughter because I had a feeling she was going to need someone in her corner. And I left nothing to Daniel. Nothing at all. When I signed the papers in Tomas's office, with his secretary as a witness, I felt lighter than I had in decades. It was like setting down a weight that I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten it was there. "The changes will take about a week to process," Tomas told me. "After that, these assets are locked in. You won't be able to change your mind easily." "I'm not going to change my mind," I said, and I wasn't. But what I did not know, what Tomas would later explain to me, was that Daniel had never actually closed an old joint account that he and I had opened years ago, back when Roberto was still alive. It had been created for emergencies, so that if something happened to me and I could not get to my money, Daniel could help. After Roberto died, I had asked him about closing it. He had kept putting it off, saying we would do it eventually. I had forgotten about it entirely. But Daniel had not forgotten. Daniel checked that account regularly, and on the day that I made my transfer to the law office, he saw it. He saw the payment to Tomas, and he knew in that moment that something significant had changed. The phone call came that evening. I had been sitting in my garden reading, watching the light change in the way that I loved, when I saw his name on the screen. My stomach tightened, but I answered, "Hello, Daniel." "Mom." His voice was tight. "What did you do?" "What do you mean? What did I do?" "I saw the payment to your lawyer. What's going on? Are you okay? Are you sick?" There it was, the concern, thin as paper, barely covering what was really there. The fear, the sudden realization that his plan, whatever it had been, was no longer going to work the way he had imagined. "I'm fine," I said calmly. "I was just organizing some things. Estate planning. That's what adults do, Daniel. We put our affairs in order." "You can't change your will without talking to me." His voice had shifted. The concern was gone. Now it was just hard. "Those are your assets. Our assets, in a way. You can't just—" "It's my will, Daniel," I interrupted. "My assets. My decision." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "What have you done?" he asked again, and this time he sounded almost frantic. "What did you tell him?" I had not planned to tell him anything, but in that moment, I made a decision. I had spent my entire life protecting people's feelings. I had spent decades swallowing hard truths so that the people around me could stay comfortable, and I was done. "You lied to me," I said, "about your mother-in-law, about the cancer treatment. You took my money under false pretenses. You've been treating me like a bank machine with a pulse, and you sent me a message telling me that I'm not worth caring for. So I'm organizing my life in a way that reflects the reality of who you are and what you actually mean to me." Silence. Long silence. "Mom, that's not fair. I was stressed. I didn't mean—" "You meant it," I said, "and I'm respecting your wishes. You have your life. I have mine. I'm going to live it in a way that brings me dignity and joy, and I suggest you do the same with yours." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but not with fear this time, with something that felt almost like power. The next morning, I went to my bank. The director knew me. I had been banking there for 30 years, back when Roberto was alive and I was a housewife with a checking account that my husband controlled. I asked to close the joint account with Daniel. I asked to set up a new account in my name only. I asked to have all of my automatic deposits redirected there. The director did this for me, but she looked worried. "Senora Ruiz," she said carefully, "is everything all right? It's unusual to make these changes so suddenly." "Everything is fine," I told her. "I'm just simplifying my finances." I don't think she believed me, but she did what I asked. Over the next week, I made other changes. I hired a locksmith to update the locks on my house. The house that was technically Daniel's, but where I lived, and where I had every right to feel safe and in control. I set up a new email address for my financial accounts. I gathered all of my documents and put them in a safe place. I documented everything just in case, and I waited. The first call came on a Thursday night. Daniel, frantic now, his voice barely containing the panic underneath. "What's happening?" he demanded. "My name is not on your bank account anymore. Where's your money?" "It's in a new account," I said. "That is not your business." "Of course it's my business. You're my mother. I'm your son. I have a responsibility to—" "To what?" I asked. "To treat me with respect. You've done a terrible job of that. Or to help me financially. I don't need your help. I never needed your help. What I needed was for you to be honest with me. What I needed was for you to love me as myself, not as a source of funds, but you're not capable of that. So we're done." He called back 3 times that night. I did not answer. Friday morning, he came to the house. I was in the garden pruning the roses that I had planted years ago when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I did not hurry. I finished the cut I was making, set down my pruning shears carefully, and turned to face him. He came through the gate in a fury that was almost beautiful in its purity. I had never seen my son so angry. His face was red. His hands were clenched into fists. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted. I have never been a woman who shouts back. My mother taught me that a raised voice was a loss of control, and a loss of control was a loss of dignity. So I kept my voice very quiet. "Lower your voice," I said. "The neighbors can hear you." "I don't care about the neighbors. I care about what you're doing. You've gone to a lawyer behind my back. You've changed your accounts. You're acting insane." "I'm not insane," I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded. I was surprised by how true that was. I'm being rational for the first time in a very long time. I'm protecting myself and my assets from someone who has shown me exactly who they are. "That money is supposed to be mine," Daniel shouted. "Mama." And when he called me Mama in that desperate voice, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but I did not let it change my resolve. That money was mine. I've been waiting for it. We've been planning our future around it. And there it was. The truth, finally, out in the open where we could both see it clearly. "Planning your future around my death," I said quietly. "Planning your life around money that you haven't earned. Well, Daniel, I'm not going to be your retirement plan." He opened his mouth to respond, but I was not finished. "You lied to me about your mother-in-law. You stole from me. You've been using me as a source of funds while treating me like a burden. And then you had the audacity to send me a message telling me that I couldn't expect you to take care of me. So I'm taking care of myself. I'm making decisions about my own life and my own legacy. And if that makes you angry, then that is a problem that you're going to have to solve." "You can't do this," he said, and his voice had changed. The anger was still there, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Fear. Real, existential fear. "You'll regret this. When you're old and sick and alone, you'll regret this, and I won't be there to help you." "I am old," I said. "I am already old, and I would rather be alone than be with someone who only sees me as a source of money. So I guess we'll find out together, won't we?" He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back to his car. I stood in the garden, watching him go, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt sad. I felt the loss of something that I had wanted very badly to be real, but that had never actually existed. He had been a kind child. He had grown into a man who was capable of love. I believed that. But he had chosen, somewhere along the way, to see me as something to be used rather than someone to be loved. That was not my failure. That was his. He did not come back for several weeks, and in those weeks, something shifted inside me. The shock of his absence was replaced by a kind of peace. I stopped waiting for him to call. I stopped checking my phone, hoping for a message. I stopped imagining conversations where he apologized and everything was okay. I simply accepted that this was the way things were now, and I began to build a life. I joined a book club. I know that sounds like a small thing, but it was transformative. These were women, mostly in their 60s and 70s, who gathered once a week in the library to discuss books and, more importantly, to discuss their lives. They were writers and teachers and nurses and artists and women who had been housewives and women who had worked and women who had done all of those things. They were women like me, which is to say, women who had spent most of their lives taking care of other people and who had discovered, late in life, that they had thoughts and feelings and desires of their own. I told them about Daniel. I did not tell them everything, but I told them enough. And instead of looking at me with pity, they looked at me with recognition. They nodded. They told their own stories. stories of children who had disappointed them, stories of money given and never returned, stories of love offered and rejected, stories of having to learn, in their 60s and 70s, how to put themselves first. "You did the right thing," one of them told me. Her name was Isabel, and she was 73 years old, and she had a daughter who had not spoken to her in 8 years. The hardest part is not regretting it. That comes later, and it's brutal, but you get through it. I started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, the one that was going to be one of my beneficiaries. I read stories to sick children. I sat with exhausted parents. I held the hand of a little boy who was terrified of his surgery, and I felt for the very first time in my life that I was doing something that was purely and completely mine. No one was making me do it. There was no obligation. I was there because I chose to be there, and that choice meant something. I started painting again. I had been a painter once before I met Roberto, before I became a wife and a mother and everything else that had consumed my life. I had pushed my paints into boxes and stored them away because they seemed selfish, sitting in the studio working on my own projects when there were children to be raised and a house to be managed and a husband to support. But now, at 68 years old, I brought those paints out again. I set up in a corner of my bedroom, and I started to remember who I had been before I became who everyone else needed me to be. The first painting was of my hands, just my hands, holding a brush, stained with years of color. I cried when I finished it. I hung it in my bedroom, and I looked at it every morning, and it reminded me of something I had forgotten, that I was real, that I had always been real, even when I did not believe it. Then came the second wave of contact from Daniel. It started with flowers, 24 roses, white ones, with a card in his handwriting. "Mom, I'm sorry. Let's talk. Daniel." I took a photograph of the card and added it to a growing file of documentation that Thomas had suggested I keep. Then I gave the flowers to the nursing home down the street. The director there was delighted. I did not tell her who they were from. Then came the letters. Lucia wrote first. The letter was carefully constructed, an apology that was not an apology, a request for forgiveness that was actually a demand, an appeal to my emotions as a grandmother. She wrote about how much the children missed me. She wrote about how stressful everything had been. She suggested that Daniel had been under enormous pressure at work. She implied that I was being unreasonable, that I was punishing them for something that was really a simple misunderstanding. "We love you," she wrote. "The children love you. Please don't do this to our family." I filed the letter away. I did not respond. Then came the calls. Lucia first, her voice soft and conciliatory. She wanted to have lunch. She wanted to talk. She wanted to fix things. I did not answer her calls. Then Daniel. His calls were different. He was sad. He was confused. He did not understand what had happened to me or why I had changed. The man who raised him, he said, would never have done this. I was acting like a stranger. "The person who raised you," I told him when I finally answered one of his calls, "was a woman who had no sense of her own value. I'm not that woman anymore. I'm sorry if you preferred her. She was easier to manipulate, but she's gone." He asked me to have dinner with him. Just one dinner, just to talk. He said that if I still felt the same way afterward, he would accept it, but he was asking me to please give him a chance. I almost said yes. I almost said yes because I was tired of saying no, because part of me still wanted to believe that he was the son I had raised, that there was a good person underneath the lies and the manipulation. Because I was lonely, and dinner with my son would be easier than facing another quiet evening alone. But then I remembered the message, the despise in those words, the deliberate cruelty of telling your aging mother that you had no intention of caring for her when she was old. That was not something that came from stress. That was something that came from a place of contempt. "No, Daniel," I said. "I'm not going to have dinner with you. I'm not going to pretend that you didn't say what you said. I'm not going to accept responsibility for your consequences." He did not call again after that. But then came the visit that changed everything. It was a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after my last conversation with Daniel. I was in my garden preparing the soil for spring planting when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I did not hear the car pull into the driveway because I was not paying attention. I heard it because, in the months since everything had changed, I had become hyper-aware of threats. I stood up, my hands still dirty, and I watched. Daniel got out of the car first, then Lucia, and then the children emerged. Carlos with his serious little face. Mia, still small enough that she needed help getting down from the car. They were holding hands. My heart broke all over again. Daniel came around to the gate, and he saw me standing in the garden, and something flickered across his face. For a moment, just a moment, I think he felt ashamed. But it passed quickly. "Hi, Mom," he said, and his voice was gentle. "We wanted to surprise you. It's such a beautiful day. We thought we could spend it together, as a family." He had not called ahead. He had not asked. He had simply arrived, with the children, knowing that I would not be able to refuse them, knowing that I loved them too much to turn them away. This was the final manipulation. This was the last card he was going to play. I set down my gardening tools. I walked to the gate. I looked at Daniel first, and then at Lucia, and then at the children. "You should have called," I said quietly. Carlos looked confused. "Don't you want to see us, Abuela?" he asked. He was 6 years old, and he could not understand why his father, had brought him somewhere he was not wanted. I had not been his grandfather, I had been his grandmother, and this was the problem, this exact moment that crystallized everything I had been learning. "Of course I want to see you," I told him, and I knelt down so that I was looking him in the eye. "I love you, mijo. I love you so much. But we don't just show up at people's houses without asking, even when we love them. That's not respectful. Do you understand?" He nodded, but he did not understand. He was 6 years old. How could he? I straightened up and looked at Daniel. "You should go," I said. "Mom, don't be like this." Daniel's voice had that pleading quality again, the one that was designed to make me feel like I was being cruel. "Let us come in. The children want to spend time with their grandmother." "The children are welcome here," I said, "but only when they come respectfully, when they come with warning, when their parents are not using them as leverage in a game. You don't get to decide when you miss your mother and then just show up expecting me to forget everything that has happened." "This is insane," Lucia said from behind him. "He's a child, Elena. Carlos, tell your grandmother how much you missed her." And Carlos, because he was a good boy and he had been told to do this, stepped forward and said, "I missed you, Abuela." My heart broke into pieces. "I missed you too, mi amor," I said, "but I'm not going to let your parents use you to manipulate me. That's not fair to you, and I love you too much to participate in that." "You're being cruel," Lucia said coldly. "You're being absolutely cruel. Your own grandchildren, Elena. You're turning your back on your own family." "No," I said. "I'm putting a boundary. I'm saying that I love my grandchildren, and I will always love them, but I'm not going to let myself be blackmailed by them. I'm not going to let you use them as weapons. If you want me in Carlos and Mia's lives, then you need to be honest with me. You need to stop lying. You need to stop trying to control me through guilt and fear. But I don't think you're going to do that, so I think you should take your children and go home." Daniel took a step toward me. His hands were clenched. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. I had never been afraid of my son before, but I was afraid now. "Get in the car," he said to Carlos and Mia, not to me, to them. "We're leaving." "Daniel," Lucia said. She was angrier than I had ever seen her. "Don't walk away from this. Don't walk away from her." "She just rejected her own grandchildren," Daniel said. "I'm done trying." I watched them leave. I watched Carlos turn back and look at me with a confusion and hurt that would haunt me for months. I stood in my garden after they drove away, and I could not breathe for several minutes. I had won. I had held my boundary. I had refused to be manipulated, and it was the worst feeling I had ever experienced. I sat down on the garden bench, and I cried. I cried for the loss of my son. I cried for my grandchildren. I cried for the idea of the family that I had wanted so desperately to be real. I cried for the version of myself that would have given in, that would have invited them inside, that would have dissolved her own boundaries rather than risk losing access to the people she loved. When the tears finally stopped, I was empty, completely empty. And in that emptiness was a terrible kind of clarity. I called Tomas that evening. He threatened to take the grandchildren away, I told him. He said if I didn't change my will, they would move and I would never see them again. Did he say that directly? Tomas asked. His wife did, but it was clearly his plan. Elena, Tomas said carefully, I want you to file a complaint with the court. I want you to document this threat. I want to build a case that you have every right to see your grandchildren, that using them as leverage is a form of emotional abuse. If they try to cut off your access, we're going to be prepared. We're going to have documentation. We're going to have evidence that they are using these children as weapons. I did what he asked. I documented everything. The visits, the calls, the letters, the threats. I wrote them down with dates and times and exact words. I created a file on my computer that was backed up in multiple places. I was building a case against my own son, and that fact alone told me how far things had gone. But something shifted inside me as I did this work. I was not just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting my relationship with my grandchildren. I was creating evidence that could someday be used to ensure that I had the right to see them, to know them, to be in their lives despite their parents' attempts to use them as bargaining chips. That night, I sat down and I wrote a letter to my grandchildren. I addressed it to Carlos and to Mia to be given to them when they turned 18. I explained, in the simplest language I could use, that their parents had made certain choices and that those choices had created distance between me and them. I told them that it was not their fault. I told them that I loved them, not because they could give me anything, but simply because they existed. I told them that when they were old enough to make their own decisions about who they wanted in their lives, I would be here. And I put away a small amount of money for each of them in a college fund that could not be touched by their parents, that would be theirs alone when they turned 18. Then I did something else. I reached out to my niece, Carla. Carla was my sister's daughter, and I had not seen her in years. She lived in the capital, in Mexico City, about 2 hours away. We had been close once, when she was small, but as I had become more and more consumed with being a wife and a mother and a grandmother, I had let that relationship drift. I called her and asked if she would like to come visit me for a weekend. She said yes immediately. I heard something in her voice, a kind of surprise and pleasure that made me realize how much I had missed her. When she arrived, she was 38 years old and she was a successful lawyer, and she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with the fact that she clearly knew who she was and did not apologize for it. I hugged her for a long time. "I've been a bad aunt," I said. "You've been a busy woman," she said. "There's a difference." We spent the weekend talking. I told her everything. I told her about Daniel, about the money, about the manipulation. I told her about the messages and the threats and the attempt to use the grandchildren as leverage. I told her about my new will and my new life. I told her about the fear and the sadness and the strange, unexpected freedom. She listened to all of it without interrupting. And when I was finished, she took my hand. "Tia Elena," she said, "there are people in this world who only know how to take. They see relationships as transactions. They don't understand that love is not an investment that you expect to be paid back. Daniel and Lucia are those people. You didn't make them that way, and you can't fix them. But you can protect yourself from them, and you can build a life that is not dependent on their goodness, because they don't have any. I cried again, but this time it was different. This time it was cathartic. What if he's right? I asked her. What if I am being cruel? What if I am being an unforgiving monster? He told your mother, Carla said, and the way she said it was very clear, very firm, that he did not want to take care of her when she was old. He told you this when you were 73 years old and could have very well needed care in the next 10 or 15 years. He was threatening you. And then, when you responded by refusing to give him everything, he tried to use your grandchildren against you. That's not normal, Tia. That's not what healthy families do. I knew she was right. But knowing something in your head and believing it in your heart are two very different things. The court date for the capacity hearing came about 2 months after Daniel filed his suit. Yes, he had filed suit. He had hired a lawyer, an aggressive one, known for family litigation, and he had filed to have me declared incompetent. He claimed that I had been unduly influenced by my lawyer. He claimed that my sudden changes were evidence of cognitive decline. He claimed that my decisions were erratic and that I was not capable of managing my own affairs. I met with a psychiatrist who was recommended by the court. She spent 3 hours with me, asking me questions, running me through cognitive tests, reviewing my medical records. She was thorough and professional and impossible to impress with emotional stories. When we were finished, she looked at me directly. "Señora Ruiz," she said, "there is absolutely no evidence of cognitive decline or undue influence. Your decisions, while perhaps emotionally difficult for your family members, are completely rational and well thought out. I will be writing a report to the court indicating that you are fully capable of managing your own affairs." The hearing happened on a cold November morning. I wore my best black dress, the one that made me feel strong. I did my hair. I wore makeup. I sat in the courtroom next to Tomas, and across from me sat Daniel and Lucia and their lawyer, and I saw my son look at me and not recognize me. Or perhaps he recognized me and did not like what he saw. A woman who was no longer willing to be small. A woman who had stopped apologizing for her own existence. A woman who had put herself first. The lawyer tried to paint a picture of a confused, grieving widow, isolated and vulnerable, making irrational decisions under the guidance of an unscrupulous attorney. It was a good performance. He did it well. But the psychiatrist destroyed his entire argument in 15 minutes. She detailed my cognitive test scores, which were excellent. She talked about my physical health, which was good. She talked about the fact that I managed my own house, drove my own car, had an active social life, and showed no signs whatsoever of the kind of cognitive decline that would be necessary for them to make their case. "Señora Ruiz," the judge said. She was a woman in her 60s, and I wondered if that mattered, if she understood something about aging women that the men in the room did not. "Did anyone force you to change your will?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Are you aware of what you are doing and the consequences of your decisions?" "Completely aware," I said. "And you are comfortable with this plan?" "Yes," I said. "My plan reflects my values and my wishes exactly." The judge looked at Daniel. She looked at his lawyer. She looked back at me. "The petition for incapacity is dismissed," she said. "Señora Ruiz is fully capable of managing her own affairs and her own estate. Case closed." I felt something release inside my chest. Daniel stood up so quickly that his chair clattered backward. I saw him looking at me with an expression on his face that I had never seen before, and I realized it was genuine, pure hatred. Not anger, not frustration. Hatred. For his own mother, for the woman who had birthed him and raised him and done everything in her power to make his life comfortable and happy. "You're going to regret this," he said as we walked out of the courtroom. "When you're old and alone and sick, you're going to regret this." "Daniel," I said, and I stopped walking so that I was facing him directly. I am already old, and I would rather be alone than with someone who hates me. Something happened in his face. For a moment, I thought I saw sadness there. For a moment, I thought I might have reached him. But then Lucia put her hand on his arm, and whatever it was that had flickered disappeared. "You're a bitch," she said to me. It was the first time she had ever spoken to me with absolute honesty. "That's possible," I said. "But I'm a bitch who respects herself. That's more than I can say for you." I walked out of that courthouse into the sunlight, and I did not look back. The months that followed were difficult in ways that I had not anticipated. The freedom I had gained came with a cost that I was still paying. I had no contact with my grandchildren. I had no contact with my son. I had won, but victory had turned out to be a lonely thing. I threw myself into my new life. I volunteered. More hours at the hospital. I painted more. I read more books with my book club. I started taking a painting class. I made friends, real friends, women my age who did not judge me, who had their own stories of adult children who had disappointed them or abandoned them or simply failed to see them. One of my friends, Patricia, had not spoken to her son in 8 years. "The guilt will come and go," she told me. "Some days you'll feel like you made a terrible mistake. Some days you'll feel like you made the only right decision you've ever made in your entire life. And both of those things will be true. You just have to learn to hold both of them at the same time." I was learning to do that. And then, 6 months after the court hearing, I received a certified letter from the bank. Daniel and Lucia had stopped paying their mortgage. They were 3 months behind. The bank was beginning foreclosure proceedings, and for some reason they had never updated their emergency contact, which meant that the bank contacted me. I called Tomas. "They're losing the house," I told him. "Are you surprised?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm curious about something. How bad is it?" Tomas hired an investigator, and what the investigator found was both heartbreaking and illuminating. In the 6 years since I had started giving Daniel money, he and Lucia had spent more than $200,000 that they did not have. Not on necessities, not on medical emergencies or children's education, on luxury travel, on a boat that they had used twice, on cosmetic surgery for Lucia, on a country club membership, on a private school that they could not afford. And they had done it because they were counting on my death to save them. More than that, the investigator found emails from years before, when Daniel had researched ways to accelerate an inheritance when parents were being difficult. He had consulted with an estate lawyer about it. The lawyer had refused to help him. But the emails existed. When I read those emails sitting in Tomas's office, I felt something that I had never felt before, a kind of cold clarity that was almost like grief. "What do you want to do?" Tomas asked. I thought about it. I thought about my son, facing financial ruin. I thought about my grandchildren who would suffer because of his poor decisions. I thought about the easy path, which would be to let him fix this himself, to let him learn the consequences of his own choices. "I want to send him a letter," I said finally. "I want him to know that I know. I want him to know that he has lost, and I want him to know that he is not getting my help, no matter what." Tomas drafted the letter with me. It was clinical, unemotional, a simple statement of facts and decisions. I had documentation of his financial mismanagement. I had documentation of the threats he had made to keep my grandchildren from me. I had documentation of the false accusations about my mental capacity. I had all of it, and I was keeping it. I was not going to help him. I was not going to bail him out. His consequences were his own. But I did not leave him entirely without resources. I provided him with information about financial counseling services. I provided him with resources about family therapy. I provided him with the names of legitimate agencies that could help him and his family navigate their financial crisis. And I told him that if he ever genuinely apologized, not for getting caught, but for what he had done, then my door would be open. The letter was delivered by a courier service on a Tuesday morning. I imagined him opening it, reading it, realizing that he had been discovered. I imagined the panic that must have set in. He did not call. He did not write. He did not reach out in any way. What I did learn through the grapevine of a small city was that they lost the house. They moved to a smaller apartment in a neighborhood that they had once been dismissive of. Lucia had to get a job. Daniel's business was struggling. They had lost the luxuries that they had been working so hard to maintain. Some part of me felt sorry for them. Some part of me, the part that was still their mother and their spouse, wanted to help. But I had learned something crucial in the past year. You cannot help people who do not want to be helped. You cannot save people from themselves. And trying to do either of those things only enables them to hurt you more. So I let them fail, and it was the kindest thing I could have done for them. A year after the court hearing, I received notice that Daniel wanted to establish supervised visitation with his children, not for my benefit, but because a judge had, in a separate custody case, apparently there was trouble in that marriage too, ordered that I be granted access to my grandchildren. Supervised visits at first, but access nonetheless. The first time I saw them, it had been almost 2 years since that visit in my garden where I had held my boundary. Carlos was 8 years old now. Mia was 6. They had grown. They had changed. They looked at me with a kind of wariness that broke my heart, but they also remembered me. And slowly, over the course of our supervised visits, they began to trust me again. I did not try to win them back with gifts or special treatment. I simply spent time with them. I read to them. I listened to their stories. I told them about their mother, about who I had been before I became a wife and a mother, about the painting and the reading and the dreams that I had set aside. When they asked me why I had not visited for so long, I told them the truth in words that they could understand. "Your parents and I had a disagreement," I said. "It was not your fault. It was not anything you did. But sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to take care of themselves, and this was one of those times." "Did you miss us?" Carlos asked, and his voice was small. "Every single day," I told him. "Every single day." The final piece of the puzzle came 2 years later, when I least expected it. I was at home, painting, when there was a knock on my door. I did not recognize the car in the driveway. I almost did not open the door. But I did. It was Daniel. He was alone. He looked older than 2 years should have made him look. His face was lined, his hair was graying at the temples. He looked like a man who had been through something. "Hi, Mom," he said. I did not invite him in. I stood in the doorway blocking entry. "What do you want?" "I wanted to," he started, and then he stopped. He took a breath. "I wanted to tell you that you were right about all of it. I was using you. I was lying to you. I was treating you like an ATM, and when you refused to keep giving me money, I punished you. I used your grandchildren as leverage. I tried to have you declared incompetent. I was a terrible son." I waited. I did not say anything. "I know you can't forgive me," he continued. "I wouldn't forgive me either. But I wanted you to know that I know what I did, and I know that it was wrong. And I wanted to apologize. Not for getting caught, but because I actually understand now, because I'm sitting in that small apartment, because Lucia and I are barely hanging on, because I see what I did to you and I see what I did to myself, and I wanted to apologize." He was crying. My son was standing on my doorstep, crying, and I wanted to reach out and comfort him the way I had comforted him when he was a child, but I did not. I had learned that some boundaries, once you set them, need to stay in place. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. "I hope you mean it. I hope you learn from this. But I can't just let you back into my life as if none of this happened. You did too much damage." "I know," he said. "But maybe, someday." "Maybe," I said, "but not today." He nodded. He turned to leave, and then he turned back. "I love you, Mom," he said. I did not answer. I closed the door, and I sat down on my sofa and I cried, not because I was sad, but because something in my chest had finally settled. I had won. Not the way I had imagined I would win, not with him broken and defeated and forced to acknowledge my superiority, but by building a life so full of meaning and purpose and genuine connection that whether or not he loved me, whether or not he respected me, whether or not he was part of my life, it no longer had the power to destroy me. That was the real victory. The years that followed were some of the best years of my life. I know that sounds impossible, given everything that had happened, but it was true. At 72 years old, I was happier than I had ever been. I continued painting, and eventually I had a small show of my work at a local gallery. I sold 3 paintings, and the joy of seeing my work hanging on someone else's wall, of knowing that they had chosen to live with something that I had created, it was transformative. The book club became my closest circle of friends. We traveled together. We had wine and conversation. We supported each other through the normal challenges of aging, health issues, grief, loneliness. We knew each other in a way that family rarely knows family. The scholarships that I had established began changing lives. I started to receive letters from women who had gone back to school using my scholarship money. Women in their 50s and 60s and 70s who had dreams that they had deferred for decades, now finally in a position to pursue them. One woman became a nurse. Another became a teacher. They told me that I had changed their lives, and the truth was that they had changed mine. My relationship with my grandchildren continued to grow. By the time Carlos turned 18, I had seen him in supervised visits that eventually became less and less supervised, consistently and with genuine love. I watched him graduate high school. I watched him fall in love for the first time. I was there in his life in the way that I wanted to be. When he turned 18, I gave him the letter I had written years before. He read it and he cried, and he hugged me, and he told me that he understood now, that he understood that what I had done was not about him or about Mia, but about taking care of myself, which was the most important thing that any of us could do. I also gave him the college fund I had established for him, enough to help with his education, enough to give him a start in life without making him dependent on his parents' damaged finances. "Why?" he asked me. "After everything they did to you, why would you do this for me?" "Because you are not them," I said, "and because I love you, and because I have learned that the only person's behavior I can control is my own. I can choose to be kind. I can choose to give, but I can do it freely without expecting anything in return. That is what love actually means." Daniel, surprisingly, eventually became someone I could have a relationship with. It was not the relationship I had wanted. It was built on new foundations, respect rather than obligation, boundaries rather than enmeshment. He could not go back to being the son I had imagined, but he became someone I could see occasionally, someone I could be civil with, someone who had learned through great pain the consequences of his own choices. We never spoke about the will. We never spoke about the money. We did not pretend that everything was fine, but we acknowledged each other as two people who had hurt each other and who were trying, imperfectly, to move forward. It was not the happy ending I would have written for my family, but it was real, and that made it valuable in a way that the fairy tale ending never could have been. Now, at 75 years old, I look at my life, and I see something that I did not expect to see. I see a woman who took her pain and transformed it into wisdom. I see a woman who learned, late in life, that she was worth respecting. I see a woman who built a legacy based not on the money she left behind, but on the lives she touched and the example she set. I think about that message, the one that started everything. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and my own family. What my son did not understand was that he had given me a gift. He had given me permission to stop being a mother first and a woman second, permission to put myself first, permission to stop sacrificing my own well-being for the approval of people who would never approve of me as I truly was. I learned that love and respect are not the same thing. I learned that you can love someone and still need to set firm boundaries. I learned that the people who matter most are often not the ones who share your blood, but the ones who share your values and choose to be present in your life. I learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. I learned that a full life does not require the participation of people who have shown you exactly who they are. And I learned, perhaps most importantly, that it is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. If I could speak to the woman I was 6 years ago, the woman who received that message and felt like her entire world was ending, I would tell her this: your pain is valid. Your anger is justified. Your desire to protect yourself is not selfish. And the life you are about to build, the life that comes after you stop apologizing for being alive, will be more beautiful and more meaningful than anything you could have imagined. You will make friends who see you. You will create art that speaks to you. You will help people who need help, not because you have to, but because you want to. You will discover that you are stronger than you thought you were. And you will look back at this moment of breaking, and you will understand that it was actually the moment that you finally began to live. And that, my dear, is the greatest revenge of all. But the story does not end there. Life, I have learned, never ends where you expect it to. 3 years after that conversation with Daniel at my door, when I was 75 years old and thought I had finally settled into the peace I had earned, something happened that would test everything I had learned. I received a call from a lawyer, not Tomas, but a woman named Patricia Sanchez, who worked for a firm that specialized in elder law and family disputes. "Senora Ruiz," she said, "I am calling because we have received a petition from your son, Daniel Morales, asking for conservatorship of your estate. He claims that despite previous court findings, you have shown signs of cognitive decline. He is asking the court to appoint him as conservator over your financial affairs." I sat down. I actually had to sit down because for a moment I thought my legs would not hold me. "But there was a court hearing," I said. "The judge said I was capable." "Yes," Patricia said. "That hearing was 3 years ago. Courts can revisit these decisions if there is new evidence. I will need to see you. I will need to assess your current state, and we need to prepare a defense." I called Tomas immediately. "This is interesting timing," he said, and I could hear something in his voice that I could not quite identify. "Elena, I have been doing some research. Daniel has been having serious financial problems, worse than what we knew about before. He is facing potential criminal charges related to some business dealings. He is desperate." "So he is trying to take control of my money again," I said. "Yes," Tomas said, "and this time I think we need to be more aggressive. I think we need to show that this is harassment. I think we need to document a pattern of behavior designed to financially exploit you." What followed was a process that was, in many ways, more difficult than the first time around, because this time I knew what was at stake. This time I understood not just the legal implications, but the emotional ones. Daniel was trying to take away my autonomy again. He was trying to prove that I was incapable. He was trying to make himself the authority over my own life. And this time, I was going to make absolutely sure that he never tried it again. I underwent a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation. I was tested for everything: memory, executive function, judgment, reasoning. I saw my regular doctor. I saw a neurologist. I compiled medical records going back years, and every single test showed the same thing. My cognitive function was not just normal for my age, it was exceptional. Meanwhile, Tomas began building a case. He documented every contact Daniel had made. He looked at the timing of this new petition, coming right as Daniel's legal problems were escalating. He gathered evidence of the previous harassment, the threats, the attempts to use the grandchildren as leverage, the pattern of behavior designed to control me through guilt and fear, and he did something else. He hired a private investigator to look into Daniel's current situation. What he found was damning. Daniel had been accused of misrepresenting the value of properties to investors. He had taken money from several people under false pretenses. He was facing potential fraud charges. His business was collapsing. And in his desperation, he was trying to get control of my estate so that he could use my money to pay off his debts and make his legal problems go away. The second hearing was held in the same courthouse as the first, but this time, I was not just a woman defending her autonomy. This time, I was a woman armed with documentation, with evidence, with a clear understanding of what was happening and why. Daniel looked worse than he had when he had come to apologize. He looked gaunt. He looked desperate. When he saw me, his eyes did not meet mine. The prosecutor laid out the evidence, the pattern of harassment, the previous court findings, the medical evaluations showing my cognitive fitness, and then she addressed the elephant in the room. "Your Honor," she said, "this petition appears to be motivated not by genuine concern for the respondent's well-being, but by the petitioner's own financial difficulties. The timing of this petition, coming as it does during a period when the petitioner is facing serious legal and financial troubles, suggests that this is an attempt to gain control of the respondent's assets for the petitioner's own benefit." Daniel's lawyer tried to argue. He tried to suggest that my behavior had changed, that I was making unusual decisions, that I was showing signs of decline. But the medical evidence was overwhelming, and the court saw right through what was happening. The judge, a different judge this time, an older man who seemed to understand something fundamental about the nature of power and family dynamics, dismissed the petition without hesitation. "It appears," he said, looking directly at Daniel, "that this petitioner is attempting to weaponize the legal system against his own mother in order to gain control of her assets. This is precisely the kind of behavior that elder law was designed to protect against. The petition is dismissed, and I am going to issue an order that any future petitions of this nature will be considered harassment and may result in sanctions." Daniel stood up. His face was red. He looked at me with an expression of pure rage, and I saw something in his eyes that I had not seen before. I saw genuine hatred. Not the anger of a disappointed son, not the frustration of someone whose plans had been thwarted. Actual, genuine hatred. "You've ruined me," he said, his voice shaking. "You took everything from me. And for what? To prove what? That you're strong? That you're independent? You're just a pathetic old woman who couldn't keep her family together." The bailiff moved toward him, but I held up my hand. I wanted to say something. I wanted to respond. But what could I say? Nothing that I said was going to change the fact that my son hated me. Nothing I said was going to make him understand what he had done or why I had responded the way I had. So instead, I simply looked at him. I looked at this man who had once been my child, and I acknowledged, silently and finally, that he was lost to me. That whatever bridge between us might have been rebuilt after his apology at my door had been burned again, and this time there would be no rebuilding. He was escorted from the courtroom by the bailiff, and I did not watch him go. I looked down at my hands, which were steady now, which no longer shook when my son was cruel to me, and I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, exactly, but finality. The acceptance that some relationships are not meant to be fixed. Some people are not meant to be part of your life. And that is okay. Tomas put his hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Elena," he said. "You protected yourself." I nodded. But I did not speak, because I knew that if I did, I would cry, and I had decided that Daniel was not worth my tears anymore. That night I called Carla. She had become, over the years, more of a daughter to me than Daniel had ever been a son. She was the person I went to for advice and comfort, the person who understood me without needing me to explain myself. "I heard," she said before I could even tell her what had happened. "News travels fast in a family, even when that family is falling apart. Are you okay?" "I think so," I said. "I'm tired, I'm sad, but I'm okay." "Do you want me to come stay with you for a while?" I said yes. And she came. And she stayed for 2 weeks. And we did not talk much about Daniel. Instead, we talked about my paintings, which had evolved considerably over the years. We talked about the scholarship program, which had now helped over 30 women return to education. We talked about my life, which was full and rich and meaningful despite, or perhaps because of, the absence of my son. And I realized something crucial. I had spent so much time and energy trying to maintain a relationship with someone who did not want to have a relationship with me. I had given him chance after chance. I had apologized for things that were not my fault. I had tried to be the kind of mother who could fix him, who could save him, who could make him into someone capable of loving me. But I could not do any of those things, and I never could have done any of those things, because the problem was not me. The problem was him, and his choices, and his refusal to take responsibility for those choices. The final closure came about 6 months later, when I received a letter from Daniel. It was handwritten, and it was long, and I almost did not open it, but I did. He wrote that he had been to therapy. He wrote that he had spent time really examining his own behavior and the patterns that had led him to try to use and manipulate me. He wrote that he understood now the depth of his own illness. Because that is what it was, he said, an illness, a kind of spiritual sickness that had made him see his mother as a resource to be extracted rather than a person to be loved. He wrote that he was not asking for forgiveness. He wrote that he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. He wrote that he was telling me this not because he expected anything from me, but because I deserved to know that my actions, my boundaries, my refusal to be manipulated, my walking away, had actually changed something. It had shocked him into a kind of awakening. And he wrote that he was working on himself. He was in recovery for a behavioral addiction that he now understood he had. He was trying to rebuild his marriage with Lucia, though he was realistic about the chances of success. He was learning, painfully and slowly, how to be a decent human being. He wrote that he understood if I never wanted him in my life again, but he wanted to leave the door open for his children. He wanted me to have access to Carlos and Mia without any conditions or limitations. And he wanted them to know that their grandmother had integrity, that their grandmother had boundaries, that their grandmother was a woman they could respect. I read that letter several times, and then I put it away, and I did not respond, but I kept it. I kept it because it was evidence that change was possible, that even the most manipulative and damaged people could sometimes wake up to what they had done. It did not heal the wound between us. It did not make me suddenly want to invite Daniel back into my life, but it was a kind of closure. It was the acknowledgement that he had heard me, finally, even if he had heard me too late. My relationship with my grandchildren continued to flourish. By the time Carlos was 22 and Mia was 20, they had become two of the most important people in my life. They visited me regularly. They called me. They asked my advice. And more importantly, they understood why I had done what I had done. "You taught me something really important, Abuela," Carlos told me one afternoon when he was home from university. "You taught me that it's okay to love someone and still have boundaries. You taught me that being a good person does not mean letting people walk all over you. You taught me that self-respect matters. That meant more to me than any apology could have. My life continued to expand and deepen. I turned 80 years old, and my book club threw me a party. There were 20 women there, women in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and we celebrated not just my birthday, but the lives that we had all built for ourselves, the autonomy we had all fought for, the respect we had all finally learned to demand. I had 5 paintings in a gallery by that time. I had helped over 50 women return to education through my scholarship fund. I was volunteering at the hospital 3 days a week. I had traveled to Spain and Portugal and Argentina. I had learned to tango. I had written a memoir which a small press had agreed to publish. And I was happy. Not in spite of everything that had happened, but perhaps because of it. Because I had learned, through pain and struggle and the constant work of maintaining my own boundaries, that happiness was not something that other people could give me or take away. Happiness was something I created, something I built with the choices I made every single day. One evening, about a year before I turned 85, I was sitting in my garden with a glass of wine, looking at the jasmine that was blooming in the fading light, and I thought about that message again, the one that had started everything. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and my own family. And I realized that the greatest gift that message had given me was not pain, though there was pain. It was not clarity, though there was that too. The greatest gift it had given me was liberation. It had freed me from the expectation that I should spend my last years dependent on someone who did not respect me. It had freed me from the obligation to keep apologizing for being alive. It had freed me to become, finally and fully, myself. I thought about the woman I had been before that message. She was not a bad woman. She was kind and generous and capable of deep love, but she was also small. She had made herself small in order to fit into the spaces that other people had created for her. She had diminished herself again and again in the hope that if she just gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, she would finally be enough. But no amount of giving was ever going to be enough for someone who did not want to receive. No amount of love was going to transform someone who had no capacity for love. And no amount of sacrifice was going to earn the respect of someone who had already decided that you had no value. The woman I had become, the woman I was at 84 years old, was different. She was not unkind, but she was firm. She was not ungenerous, but she was discerning about where her generosity went. She was capable of deep love, but she was no longer willing to pour that love into a bottomless well. And she was happy. She was genuinely, deeply happy. I have been asked many times whether I regret the choices I made, whether I regret the will, the boundaries, the refusal to participate in my son's manipulation, and my answer has always been the same. I regret the necessity of those choices. I wish that I had not had to choose between my dignity and my family. I wish that my son had been capable of respecting me without being forced to do so by legal documents and firm boundaries. But do I regret making those choices? No, never. Because I learned something that I think every woman, every person really, but especially women of my generation, needs to know. And that is this: you are not responsible for fixing other people. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You are not required to sacrifice your own well-being, your own dignity, your own autonomy in order to maintain a relationship with someone who does not respect you. These are not cruel things to believe. These are not selfish things to believe. These are the things that a person who loves herself believes. And loving yourself is not selfish. It is the foundation of everything else. I also learned something about revenge, because that is what this story is fundamentally about. Revenge, though not the kind that most people think of when they hear that word. Revenge is not about making someone suffer. Revenge is not about cruelty or punishment or forcing someone to pay for what they have done. Real revenge, the kind that actually heals you, is about building a life so beautiful and so full that the person who tried to destroy you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. My revenge against Daniel was not the will, though that was part of it. My revenge was not the legal victories, though those felt good. My real revenge was the life I built. It was the paintings. It was the scholarships. It was the women I helped return to education. It was the children at the hospital who I read to and comforted. It was the friendships that I deepened and the travels that I took and the joy that I found in simply being alive. My revenge was becoming so full, so rich, so genuinely happy that my son's absence from my life became something I barely noticed. That was the real victory. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear me clearly. If you are in a situation like mine was, if you are being manipulated by someone who is supposed to love you, if you are giving and never receiving, if you are being told that you are a burden, if you are being threatened and controlled and made to feel small, you have options. You do not have to accept this. You do not have to stay. And if you are an older woman, if you are past 60 or past 70 or past 80, and you have spent your life making sure that everyone else was okay, and you have neglected yourself, and you have forgotten who you were before you became someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's grandmother, it is not too late. It is never too late. You can still paint. You can still travel. You can still love and be loved. You can still build something meaningful. You can still become the person you always wanted to be. You deserve respect. You deserve kindness. You deserve to have your boundaries honored. And if the people in your life cannot give you those things, then you deserve the freedom to remove them from your life and replace them with people who can. I am 85 years old. I am widowed. I am estranged from my son. I do not have grandchildren living nearby. In many ways, by the standards that society sets for women of my age, I should be sad. I should be lonely. I should be diminished. But I am not. I am full. I am alive. I am genuinely happy. And I think that is the most important thing I can tell you. Not that I won a legal battle. Not that I got revenge on my son. Not that I proved that I was right and he was wrong. Those things are true, but they are not the most important thing. The most important thing is that I became the architect of my own life. I took the pain that was inflicted on me, and I transformed it into something else. I became, finally, someone that I actually respect, someone that I actually like, someone that I am proud to be. And if my story can help someone else do that, if my story can show someone that it is possible to put yourself first and still be a good person, if my story can demonstrate that boundaries are not cruelty but self-love, then the pain was worth it, because that is the real victory. That is the real revenge. That is what actually matters in the end. I am Elena Maria Ruiz de Morales. I am 85 years old, and I am finally, completely, entirely my own. Now, I want to speak to you directly. I know that you are listening to this story, and I know that some of you are seeing your own lives reflected in mine. Some of you have children who have disappointed you. Some of you have given money that was never repaid. Some of you have been told that you are a burden. Some of you have been manipulated by the people who are supposed to love you. I want you to know that you are not alone. I want you to know that your pain is real and valid. I want you to know that the anger you feel is justified, and I want you to know that you have the power to change your situation. It will not be easy. It will require you to do things that go against everything you were taught about being a good mother, a good wife, a good daughter, a good woman. It will require you to set boundaries that people will call cruel. It will require you to say no to people you love. It will require you to walk away from relationships that you have invested decades in. But on the other side of that difficulty is a freedom that you cannot even imagine right now. There is a life waiting for you, a life where you get to decide how you spend your time and your money and your energy. There is a life waiting for you where you are not constantly apologizing for existing. There is a life waiting for you where you are respected, where you are valued, where you are actually seen. And that life is worth fighting for. That life is worth the pain. That life is worth the difficult conversations and the legal battles and the sleepless nights and the moments when you wonder if you have made a terrible mistake. You have made the right choice. Trust me, you have made the right choice. I am 85 years old, and I have never been happier, and if I can do it, if I can transform my life at this stage, then so can you. It is never too late. It is never too late to start over. It is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. That is my story. That is my revenge. And that is my gift to you, the knowledge that it is possible, that you are capable, that you are worthy of the respect you are demanding, that you are enough, exactly as you are, without needing anyone else's approval to prove it. Go, build your life. Paint your paintings, plant your gardens, love your friends, help your community, become the person you always wanted to be, and do not apologize for a single moment of it, because you deserve to be happy, and happiness is not selfish. Happiness is freedom, and freedom is everything. I am Elena, and I am finally, completely, entirely free. But life, as I have learned over my 85 years, is never as simple as a neat ending. It is messier than that. It is more complicated. And there is always more story to tell. About 3 years after that second court hearing, when I had become accustomed to my estrangement from Daniel, when I had built a life so full that his absence barely registered anymore, something unexpected happened. Something that would test, one final time, everything I had learned about boundaries and forgiveness and the nature of love itself. Lucia came to my door. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn. I was in my garden, as I often was in those days, reading a book and drinking tea. I had become something of a creature of routine in my advanced age. Mornings for painting, afternoons for reading, evenings for my book club or for time with my grandchildren. It was a rhythm that suited me. It was peaceful. When I heard the knock, I almost did not answer. I had learned over the years to be cautious about unexpected visitors, but something in me, some instinct that I had not yet learned to fully suppress, made me go to the door. Lucia was standing there, and I barely recognized her. She had aged dramatically in the time since I had last seen her. She had been a beautiful woman, sharp and polished, always put together in the way that comes from having money and access to the kind of care that money provides. But the woman standing on my doorstep was different. She was thin, too thin. Her hair, which had always been perfectly colored and styled, was gray and unkempt. Her clothes were worn, and her eyes had the quality of someone who had seen too much suffering and was barely holding it together. "Elena," she said, and her voice shook as she said my name. "May I come in?" I hesitated. Every part of my carefully constructed self, the self that had learned to protect itself, screamed at me to close the door, to send her away, to have nothing to do with this woman who had conspired with my son to manipulate me, who had used my grandchildren as weapons, who had called me cruel and heartless and selfish. But something else was louder than that voice, something that I had not anticipated and did not want to feel: curiosity. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the living room. I did not offer her tea. I did not soften the gesture with hospitality. I simply waited to hear what she had to say. Lucia sat on my sofa, the sofa where Daniel and I had had so many difficult conversations, where I had wept after his visits, where I had slowly learned to recognize him as a stranger, and she began to cry. Not the kind of tears that come from manipulation or performance. Real tears. Deep tears. The tears of someone who has been broken and is trying to put herself back together. "I left him," she said, once she could speak. "I left Daniel 3 months ago. I packed a bag and I left, and I have not looked back." I said nothing. I waited. "I could not do it anymore," she continued. "I could not keep pretending. I could not keep helping him scheme and manipulate people. I could not keep lying to myself about who he is and what he has done. And most importantly, I could not keep letting him poison my relationship with my children. She looked up at me, and there was something in her expression that I had never seen before. Shame. Real, genuine shame. Not the shame of being caught, but the shame of finally understanding what you have done and being unable to undo it. I told the children everything, she said. I told Carlos and Mia that their father and I had lied to you about the cancer treatment. I told them that we had been trying to manipulate you. I told them that you were not the villain in this story. I was. We were. And I wanted them to know the truth before they went any further in their lives believing a lie. I felt something in my chest shift, something that I thought I had closed off completely, and I had to take a breath before I could respond. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I owed it to you," Lucia said. "Because you deserved better. And because I am trying to become someone different than I was, and I cannot do that without acknowledging what I did to you." What followed was a long conversation, longer than I expected, longer than I wanted, if I was being honest. Lucia told me about her life with Daniel. She told me about the pressure she had felt to maintain a lifestyle that they could not afford. She told me about the shame of realizing, too late, that she had married someone who was fundamentally incapable of love. She told me about the moment she realized that their entire marriage was built on a foundation of lies and deception and financial manipulation. "I was complicit," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I was not a victim. I made choices. Bad choices. Choices that hurt you and hurt your grandchildren and ultimately hurt myself. I was as much a part of this as Daniel was." And then she told me something that I did not expect to hear. "I am in therapy," she said. "I have been for a year, and my therapist has been helping me understand why I did the things I did, why I was willing to participate in hurting someone who had been nothing but kind to me, why I was willing to use children as pawns in a game to get money. And what I have learned is that I was repeating patterns from my own family. My mother was like this. My grandmother was like this. It is a kind of sickness, a kind of inability to see other people as fully human, and I am trying to break that cycle." I believed her. I could see it in her face, hear it in the way she spoke. She was not trying to manipulate me. She was simply telling me the truth, as painfully and as honestly as she could. "What do you want from me?" I asked, because I needed to know the answer to that question before I could decide how to proceed. "Nothing," she said immediately. "I do not want anything from you. I came here to tell you that I am sorry, genuinely sorry, and to tell you that you were right. You were right to protect yourself. You were right to set boundaries. You were right to do everything that you did, and I wanted you to know that I understand that now." She paused, and then she continued. "And I wanted to tell you something else. I want to help you with your grandchildren. I want to make sure that Carlos and Mia have access to you without any conditions or limitations. I have arranged for their college education to be paid for, not by money that I give them, but through a separate fund that I am building with my own work. I am working as a therapist now. Did I mention that? I went back to school. And I am using my money to make sure that the children have what they need, not as a way to control them, but as a way to give them a real choice in their lives." I did not know what to say. I had spent years being prepared to resist Lucia, to be on guard against her manipulation and her schemes. I had not spent years preparing myself for the possibility that she might actually change, that she might actually become someone different. "I do not expect forgiveness," she said, and I think she meant it. "I do not expect us to have a relationship. I just wanted you to know." She left after that. She stood up and she apologized again, and she left her phone number, not asking me to call, but leaving it in case I wanted to. And she walked out of my house and out of my life, possibly forever. I sat for a long time after she left, I sat in my living room and I thought about forgiveness. I thought about the nature of apology. I thought about the possibility that people could actually change, that damage could actually be repaired, that the past did not have to dictate the future. And I realized something. I had been so focused on protecting myself from Lucia, on maintaining my boundaries, on refusing to be manipulated by her, that I had not left any room for the possibility that she might become someone worth knowing. I had frozen her in time as the villain in my story, and I had not considered that she might have her own story, her own journey, her own pain and growth. I did not call her immediately. I spent several weeks thinking about what she had said. I talked to Carla about it. I talked to my book club. I talked to Thomas. And I came to understand something important. Forgiveness is not the same as returning to the way things were. Forgiveness does not mean pretending that the harm was not done. Forgiveness simply means releasing the anger and the hurt and the need for revenge and allowing someone to be different than they were. So I called her and I said, I believe you, and I think we can try. What followed was, improbably, a friendship. Not the close friendship that I had with Carla or with my book club, but a real friendship nonetheless. Lucia and I began to see each other regularly. We had tea, we went to museums, we talked about our lives, and slowly I got to know the person that she was becoming, someone who was genuinely trying to be better, who was genuinely trying to atone for what she had done, who was learning, like I had learned, that it was never too late to become a different person. More importantly, my relationship with my grandchildren became uncomplicated for the first time. With Lucia actively managing Daniel's access to them, with Lucia being honest with them about the truth of our family's story, they were able to have a relationship with me that was not fraught with guilt or confusion or conflicting loyalties. Carlos, by the time he was 25, was studying psychology. He told me that he wanted to work with families to help people navigate the kind of dynamics that we had navigated. He said that watching me maintain my boundaries, watching me refuse to be manipulated, had taught him something crucial about self-respect and dignity. Mia, at 23, had become an artist. She was a sculptor, working primarily with recycled materials. She made beautiful things, abstract forms that seemed to contain some kind of emotion or truth that I could not quite articulate. When I asked her where she got her inspiration, she said, "From watching you rebuild your life, Abuela, from seeing that it is possible to create something beautiful from broken pieces." That broke my heart and healed it at the same time. On my 86th birthday, my book club threw me a party, as they always did. But this year, something was different. My grandchildren were there. Lucia was there. Even Carla brought her partner, a woman named Sophia, who was kind and warm and clearly loved my niece very much. And we sat in my garden, surrounded by the jasmine and the roses that I had planted and nurtured over decades, and we celebrated not just my birthday, but my life, the life that I had fought for, the life that I had built from broken pieces, the life that I had finally learned to love. At one point, Carlos pulled me aside. "Abuela," he said, "I want to tell you something. I have been thinking about what you did, how you protected yourself, how you refused to be used, and I have been thinking about how brave that was, how hard that must have been, and I want you to know that what you did mattered. It mattered to me. It mattered to Mia. It taught us that we do not have to accept being treated badly just because the person treating us badly is family." I hugged him, and I felt something release in my chest, because I realized that the thing I had been most afraid of, that my grandchildren would resent me for my boundaries, that they would think I was cruel for walking away, that I would lose them because I refused to be manipulated, had not come to pass. Instead, they had learned from it. They had understood it, and they respected me for it. Mia, later that same evening, gave me a sculpture. It was a new piece, something she had just finished. It was abstract, but when you looked at it from a certain angle, you could see a woman with her hands on her own shoulders, holding herself, protecting herself, but also reaching outward at the same time. There was strength in it, and vulnerability, and a kind of quiet power that I recognized immediately as myself. "This is you," Mia said. "This is what you look like to me. This is what I see when I think of you." I cried, and this time it was not painful crying. It was the kind of crying that comes from being truly seen, truly understood, truly loved. That night, I sat alone in my house. The house that was mine, truly mine now, with nothing hanging over it or threatening it or making me feel unsafe in it. And I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the woman I had been, the woman who read that terrible message and felt her world ending. I thought about the choices I had made, choices that had seemed so difficult at the time, choices that had felt like I was being cruel or selfish or heartless. I thought about the legal battles and the rejections and the pain of losing my son, at least in the way that I had imagined having a son. And I thought about the woman I had become, a woman with a full life, a woman with genuine friends, a woman with grandchildren who respected me, a woman with work that mattered, a woman with paintings hanging in galleries, a woman with scholarships bearing her name, a woman who had learned that she was worth respecting even if no one else ever did. The thing that I want you to understand, the thing that I think is crucial to understand, is that you do not have to choose between being loved and being respected. You do not have to choose between being kind and having boundaries. You do not have to choose between being a good person and protecting yourself. All of those things can exist at the same time. In fact, they must exist at the same time, because a person who does not respect herself cannot truly be loved. A person who does not protect herself cannot truly be kind because she will eventually become bitter and resentful. A person who does not set boundaries cannot truly be good because she will enable harm. The greatest act of love that I performed in my entire life was not any of the sacrifice or the giving or the endless care that I provided for my family. The greatest act of love was the day I said no, the day I set a boundary, the day I chose myself. And I want you to know that if you are in a position where you need to make that choice, you are not being selfish. You are not being cruel. You are being brave. You are being wise. You are being someone who understands that you are worth protecting. I am now 87 years old. I am in better health than I was at 70. I am happier than I have ever been. I have more genuine connections than I ever had before, and I have a legacy that matters, not just the money that I have given away, though that matters, but the example I have set. The way I have shown my grandchildren that it is possible to love someone and still have boundaries. The way I have shown them that it is possible to be a woman of dignity and strength. The way I have shown them that it is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Daniel and I have never reconciled. He has tried a few times to reach out again, but each time I have gently declined. I do not think that we can have a relationship. I think that there is too much damage, too much history. But I have also come to a place where I do not need him to reconcile. I do not need his apology. I do not need his love or his respect, because I have those things from myself. And that is enough. Lucia and I have developed something like a real friendship. She has been dating a man for 2 years, a kind man who seems to treat her well. She is happy, and I am glad for her, not because she was part of my pain, she was, but because I have come to understand that people can be capable of wrong and also capable of growth. People can hurt you and also learn from that hurt. People can be villains in one chapter of their lives and heroes in another. My grandchildren are thriving. Carlos is in graduate school for psychology. Mia is building a reputation as an artist. They visit me regularly. They call me. They tell me that they love me. And they do not resent me for the boundaries I maintained. They respect me for them. My book club continues to meet every week. We have expanded to include younger women now, women in their 50s and 60s who are navigating the same challenges that we navigated earlier. And I get to be the elder in the room, the woman who has lived through it and come out the other side. That role brings me joy. I continue to paint. I continue to volunteer. I continue to help women return to education. I continue to live a life that feels genuinely, authentically mine. And every morning I wake up, and I am grateful. Not grateful that my son hurt me. Not grateful that I had to fight legal battles. Not grateful for the pain. But grateful that I was able to transform that pain into something else. Grateful that I was stubborn enough and strong enough to refuse to disappear. Grateful that I loved myself enough to protect myself. If you are listening to this story and you are recognizing your own life in it, I want to tell you something important. You have more power than you think you do. You have more options than you think you do. You have more worth than anyone who is manipulating you has told you that you have. Your love is not a currency. Your sacrifice is not payment. Your presence is not something that should be conditional on how much you are willing to give. You are a person, a full person, a person with dignity and rights and the absolute right to say no. And if there are people in your life who cannot see that, who cannot respect that, who cannot love you in a way that honors your personhood, those are people you can leave. You can walk away. You can build a life without them. And that life, I promise you, will be more beautiful and more full than you can possibly imagine right now. I am Elena Maria Ruiz de Morales. I am 87 years old, and I am still becoming. I am still learning. I am still growing. And so are you. It is never too late. It is never too late to start over. It is never too late to put yourself first. It is never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. That is not cruelty. That is love. That is the deepest, most honest, most powerful kind of love. Love for yourself, respect for yourself, the decision at any age, at any point in your life to say, I am worth it. I am enough. And I deserve to be happy. Go. Build your life. Set your boundaries. Paint your paintings. Plant your gardens. Love fiercely the people who love you back in equal measure. And do not apologize for a single moment of it, because you deserve it. And your life, your real, authentic, fully lived life, is the greatest revenge and the greatest gift you can possibly give yourself. I am Elena. I am free. And I am still here, still loving, still learning, still becoming. And that, my dear, is how the story actually ends. Not with closure, but with continuation. Not with a period, but with a comma, and the promise of more story yet to tell. You know, when you reach my age, people often ask you what you would do differently if you could go back and do your life over again. They ask it as if there is some magic combination of choices that would have led to a perfect ending. Some version of events where everything worked out and everyone was happy and there was no pain. But I have come to believe that the question itself is flawed. Because pain is not something to be avoided. It is something to be integrated. It is the raw material of growth. And without it, I would not have become the woman I am now. Would I have preferred to never receive that message from Daniel? Of course. Would I have preferred to have a son who loved me without conditions? Of course. Would I have preferred to not have to fight legal battles and set firm boundaries and lose years of relationship with my grandchildren? Of course. But I also know that the pain that I experienced was the catalyst for everything that is good in my life now. It was the reason that I was forced to examine who I was. It was the reason that I discovered my own strength. It was the reason that I learned what I was actually capable of. So when people ask me if I regret my choices, I tell them this: I regret the necessity of making those choices, but I do not regret making them. Because the life that I built on the other side of those choices is so much richer, so much more meaningful, so much more authentically mine than the life I was living before. There is a woman named Isabel in my book club. She is 82 years old, and she has not spoken to her daughter in 10 years. The estrangement happened because Isabel set a boundary. Because Isabel said no to something that her daughter wanted, and the daughter, like Daniel, responded with anger and threats, and eventually, silence. For a long time, Isabel was devastated by this. She thought that she had done something terribly wrong. She thought that she was a bad mother. She thought that she should have just accepted being manipulated, being used, because the alternative, losing her daughter, was too painful. But then she did what I did. She built a life. She found community. She learned who she was outside of being someone's mother, and she became someone she actually liked. And last year, her daughter reached out. Not to apologize, but to ask to have a relationship with her mother again, to see if they could try. And Isabel, with clear eyes and firm boundaries, said yes, she would try, but not in the way that they had been before, in a new way, a way that honored both of their boundaries and both of their autonomy. They are still working on it. The relationship is fragile, but it exists. And it exists on a foundation of mutual respect, not on a foundation of obligation or guilt. That is what is possible when you refuse to be diminished. That is what is possible when you love yourself enough to protect yourself. That is what is possible when you build a life so full that other people's absence becomes less important than your own presence. I want to tell you about something that happened just last month, actually. I was at the market buying flowers to paint when I ran into an old friend. Her name was Maria, and she had been close to me when Roberto was alive. I had not seen her in years. She had moved away, and we had lost touch, as sometimes happens. She was delighted to see me. We talked for a while, and then she said something that has stayed with me. "Elena," she said, "you look so different. You look happy. What happened?" And I realized that it was true. I look different now, not because of surgery or makeup or anything external, but because my face carries a different kind of expression now. It carries the expression of someone who is no longer constantly trying to be small enough to fit into other people's expectations. It carries the expression of someone who is living a life that feels authentic and genuine. "I became myself," I told her. Finally, at 87 years old, I became myself. And I think that is the most important thing that I can tell you, that it is possible, that it is never too late, that the woman that you were always meant to be is still inside you, waiting for you to have the courage to set her free. You do not have to wait until you are 87. You do not have to wait until your family has hurt you so badly that you are forced to protect yourself. You can choose right now, today, to begin building the life that you actually want to live. You can choose right now to set boundaries with the people in your life who are using you. You can choose right now to prioritize your own well-being. And yes, it will be difficult. Yes, people will be angry with you. Yes, you might lose relationships that you thought would last forever. Yes, you might be called selfish and cruel and heartless and ungrateful, but you will also gain something that is worth more than any of those things. You will gain yourself. You will gain your own respect. You will gain the knowledge that you are capable of building a beautiful, full, meaningful life, with or without the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. That is worth everything. That is worth the pain. That is worth the sacrifice. I am Elena. I am 87 years old, and I am still here, still becoming, still learning. I am still painting. I am still volunteering. I am still helping women build lives of their own. I am still in community with people who love me not because they have to, but because they choose to. And every single day, I am grateful for the message that started everything. The message that was meant to hurt me, but instead freed me. The message that showed me exactly who my son was, so that I could finally stop pretending he was someone he was not. That is the gift. That is the grace. That is the moment where I finally understood what it meant to love myself. And if this story has given you anything, I hope it has given you permission. Permission to protect yourself. Permission to say no. Permission to walk away from relationships that are harming you. Permission to put yourself first. Permission to become who you were always meant to be. Because you deserve it. You deserve respect. You deserve dignity. You deserve to be loved in a way that honors your personhood and your autonomy. And if the people in your life cannot give you that, then you deserve the freedom and the strength to remove them from your life and replace them with people who can. Go build your life. Go become yourself. Go live the life that you were always meant to live, because it is waiting for you, and it is beautiful. I am Elena, and my story is not over. It is just beginning.